before I get started, I know that no one's going to really listen to me until I address the elephant in the room. So let's get this over with. I watched the debate this morning. There were a few things said. I can't comment on them. But I can comment on the accusation that dead people are voting. The rolls are what they are because people are registered. Once people are registered, if they are on those rolls, it's up to the state to clean those rolls. That does not mean that people are voting on those rolls. So if you see dead people voting, I think we have more problems than just people voting. So that's it. I'm addressing the elephant in the room and before my friend from Uganda asks. So on with my presentation. So, because I believe that this is something that's very, very important. And I'm sure that I'll get more questions from the media as we go on. So I addressed these things earlier yesterday. I wanted to thank the Chief Election Officer for inviting me here today, the Deputy and the Commissioner as well. I think that this conference has been very valuable to talk with people from around the world about their experiences and things that, I've learned a lot as I've gone on through this. I also want to thank the staff who have put this together, because I know that this is a hard thing to do, and sometimes it goes thankless, but I want to say thank you for all your help in getting this done. U.S. military and overseas voters have a unique law in the United States called the Uniform Overseas Citizens Absentee Voting Act, which was put together in 1996 and signed by President Reagan. It's not the first overseas act that was done for military and overseas voters, but it's comprehensive and it put everything together under one piece of legislation. It's basically for active military personnel, merchant marines, overseas citizens who may be working for the U.S. State Department or other entities, and for people in the United States who may be working for companies overseas as well. And I was able to take advantage of this as I was a student overseas for a couple of years, once when I was in Australia and once when I was in England. So, the Help America Vote Act has, which was signed in 2002, added to this provision to ensure that it makes sure that there's one single office that the military and overseas folks can come to ensure that that they can apply for absentee votes and absentee ballots and things like that as well. The Election Assistance Commission does a biannual report after every federal election on the number of ballots that were transmitted and received after every general election. The HAVA also extended the period covered by single absentee ballot application, which means that if I applied for my overseas ballot and voted in an election, a primary election, before it would be that I would have to apply again and again, but now this extends it out for 2 years. And it prohibits the refusal of a voter registration ballot for early submission. So if people were submitting that before the actual time for submission, they can now make sure that that is adhered to. The MOVE Act, which I worked on when I was working in the U.S. Congress in 2009, which was signed by President Bush and President Obama, basically allows for two major pieces for military and overseas voters. One is that it allows for 45 days before the election, before a federal election, for ballots to be sent out. This year, that for the general election, that was September 24th, and each state was mandated to send out ballots overseas to military and overseas voters by that time frame. They could do it ahead of time, but they had to do it at least by September 24th. The other major provision of that allows for the transmission of those ballots electronically overseas to military and overseas voters. But there are 26 states that allow for the receipt of those ballots back electronically. Some allow for folks to use the internet to vote those ballots, but once that's done, they have to waive their right of privacy. So that means that your vote is no longer private. And that's one of the downfalls of that piece of the legislation. But it also allows for it to be sent back via fax or PDF as well. There are more resources that are allowed for the overseas and military voters. One is the federal postcard application, the FPCA, which allows for you to download that to basically let the states know who you are, where you are, and which ballot you would be receiving. So that would go right into the individual states and those localities to allow for you to receive your ballot. The federal write-in absentee ballot is a last piece of resort that would allow for you, if you do not receive your ballot, that you can download that and just vote for federal races, which would allow for you to still exercise your right for president and Congress and the U.S. Senate as well. But that's the last resort. There is partnerships with state and local election officials with military bases inside the United States and abroad to ensure that those military personnel can receive their ballots. I've gone to a number of bases around the country and seen how each individual base has an officer that's assigned to ensure that the military and folks receive their information and are able to get that information out. The Election Assistance Commission works with a number of partners to ensure that military and overseas voters can get their ballots. With federal partners, we work with the Department of Defense, the National Institute of Standards and Technology, which basically does a lot of our voluntary voting system guidelines and the standards themselves. Basically, the NIST is an organization that does a lot of standards in terms of, I'm trying to equate it the best way I can, like for heat and if you drop something from a certain level, how far can you drop that before it actually breaks, those sorts of standards like that. And then the U.S. Postal Service, which has in more recent years consolidated a number of postal facilities, which makes it a little harder for individuals to get their ballots, but we've been working with them to ensure that they postmark these things correctly and that they expedite them a little faster as well. Non-governmental partners that we use are these folks here, like the Pew Charitable Trust, the Democracy Fund, CSG, which I'll talk about a little bit later, the Bipartisan Policy Center, which had both the lawyers for Mitt Romney and for Obama chairing a commission when the Election Assistance Commission was not up and running to talk about pieces of legislation and pieces of making sure that the election works as well as it should be and democracy works as well. And other governmental agencies that represent election officials like the National Association of State Election Directors, NAS, which is the Association of Secretaries of State, and the state legislatures as well. So some of the things that we're working on is to ensure that plain language is used, the federal postcard application is used, online voter registration, which has been massively successful in ensuring that people can get their ballots and so forth. So when I was talking about CSG a little bit earlier, they have a $3.2 million initiative to work towards ensuring that military and overseas voters can get their ballots a little bit quicker and make sure that they send those back in. So CSG is a group of election officials, which are state, local, and federal election officials coming together to ensure that this initiative is fulfilled. They hope to have a report at the end of December on best recommendations to move forward with that. This is a picture, a snapshot of the survey that the Election Assistance Commission does every 2 years. This is the one that we just published in June of this year with the help of the Department of Defense. Our Be Ready 16 campaign is one that I'm very happy for. I'm happy that I was chair during this year because we were able to go across the country to talk to election officials about being ready for the general election coming up. So election security, preparedness, accessibility, managing technology, and getting voter guides out as much as possible. So this is one of the things that we have worked on. It's on our website at eac.gov, and it lists lots of different things as well. And this is just a snapshot of some of the things that are on that page as well.
Great question. As you know, one of the priorities this year for the EAC and FAP was to learn a lot more about election mail. We've both been working with our postal experts in both the United States Postal Service and in the Military Postal Service Agency to understand the challenges that we have with mail. This is incredibly important with our UOCAVA voters because most of them are either receiving their ballots by mail or sending them back by mail. And election officials, as you know, play a huge part in this. What we've been doing is making sure that the resources are available for election officials. So one of the most important things is to know where those resources are. Your own website, eac.gov, has those resources. So if you go to your page, votebymail.gov, those resources are there for you to understand mailing, what are the things that you need to do. So we're asking election officials, just like you and I are trying to get more educated about this, to really understand the process. The other thing that we're asking election officials to do is to make sure that their staff are knowledgeable about some of the postal requirements. And the best way to do this is we're encouraging people to meet with their local postmaster generals. We're saying, do this early. Make sure that when you bring your ballots to the post office, it's not the first time that you've met with the Postmaster General and your local postal staff.
So that was Matt Bomer, who is the director of FAP. This is a quick snapshot of some of the resources that we have on our website. The UOC, the UOCAVA sheet I have out in the display area as well. And this is their website to show, and there's one other story that I wanted to tell. So along with FAP, you can vote, if you're a military and overseas voter, you can vote from anywhere in the world. And there's one story that I'm particularly happy about is that there was even one voter who was part of Houston, which is where our Johnson Space Center is, who voted from space. So he had to give up his right of privacy, but he sent that back electronically to Houston, and it was counted as a ballot from the International Space Center. So this is also a snapshot of the FAP webpage, and this is how we've gotten our information out to folks through Twitter, Facebook, through our Be Ready 16 campaign, and we have a YouTube channel as well. So with that, I will end, and hopefully there will be no questions about the debate.